over in the upper right, it says view. It says, we just got a recording in progress. Notice it says view all the way up in the right-hand side. And when I click that, I can do a side-by-side with just the speaker and the PowerPoint. Can you all see me?
Yeah, so it should just be selecting the view mode in that top right corner and selecting speaker and screen for your view. And you should be able to continue from there and see everything for our presentation today.
Boy, the questions are really going up there.
Yeah.
All right, should I continue? Are we okay?
I think we are good to go for now. If anyone's having issues, you can let me know in the chat and I'll help direct you through the chat mode. Okay.
Sorry about that, folks. So I was going over our grant review schedule. It is a lengthy schedule. Last year, I did want to make the point that in addition to our staff site visits, we use outside evaluators as part of our process. You'll hear about this a little bit later on. These are highly qualified individuals who are familiar with the types of projects that we're funding, and this keeps our process as objective as possible. So the one thing to keep in mind is that the only thing that they know about you, your site, and your project is what you tell them in the application and what you show them in the application. So always keep that in mind as you're working on the application going forward. From last year's round, the 2022, our governor signed the appropriations bill in December. So I'm hopeful. The staff right now are busy working on grant agreements for that round. But hopefully we'll see that same timing happening in your round that you're applying for now. Just a little housekeeping. This is a webinar. So technically you should only be able to see the slide and the presenter, but Vito can also help you with that. You can use the Q&A function. I think most of you have found that already for any questions. We're either going to respond in writing if it's something that's simple. If we think we need to have the staff answer it live, we'll do it after each section. Next slide. Today, you're going to hear from a majority of our staff. Yes, we're growing, and there are some new members listed on this screen. Yay. And they're always available to answer questions as you work on your applications. As you might have noted, this is also being recorded so that it can be referred to if you need to review any of the information. And can't impress this enough, please don't wait till April 17th to begin this application. As the staff go through each section of the application, I just wanted to mention a few things. A couple months ago, we did a survey as part of the board's strategic planning, and we asked for the opinions of former and future grantees. And I just wanted to thank anyone who's here with us in the audience today who may have responded to that survey. We received a lot of good feedback about our process and our application, and I think we will be taking all of that into consideration in the coming months. I know staff will reinforce this, but please understand that we read every word in your application, including your consultant's proposals. So there's no need to copy paste information you've already told us. Brief, clear, concise are all good words, and I assure you that you won't lose any points with brevity in these applications. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Shannon, and she'll fill you in on what you can expect today during this webinar.
Sorry, it would help if I unmuted myself. I'm Shannon Brummer. I'm one of the Trust Historic Preservation Specialists. So I'm going to get us started today by going kind of through a brief overview of the webinar and then the order of our presentation. Alexis, next slide, please. So first and foremost, obviously, as Dorothy just mentioned, our presentation is being recorded today, so everyone can refer to it later if needed. The recording, as well as the PDF versions of our slides, will be posted on our website sometime in the next week or two. We will have Q&As held after every section, as well as at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that you guys may have. And please use the Q&A function to submit any of the questions that you will have. We also ask that if you have any project-specific questions, so anything that's related directly to your project scope of work, or anything that might be a very specific question to your needs, we ask that you please email those questions to us at the email that's on the screen right now. So that way we can best assist you with your specific questions, since this is going to be really answering a lot of just the basic overall questions and concerns about all of our grants. As for the agenda for today, I'm going to get us started on going over our grant guidelines. Then we'll move into some information regarding our archaeological requirements. We'll also get into detail about each of the application types. So we'll go through historic site management, or our HSM grants first. We'll then go into our municipal, county, and regional planning projects, our MCRP grants, and then our heritage tourism grants and our capital grants. Once we finish going through each application type, we'll take a closer look at the required application attachments, as well as how to set your application apart in the process. We highly recommend that everyone stay until the very end, since those sections are extremely important for having a successful application. Next slide, please. So before I begin going over our 2023 grant guidelines, I just want to note that the section that I'm about to go through is a very brief overview. So I ask that you please refrain from asking any questions about the details of each application type or specific requirements until those sections come up, because my colleagues will be going into the details of each application type individually. Next slide, please. So first, we're going to begin by going through some of the most notable changes for the 2023 applications. Like last year, the maximum grant award for our historic site management and heritage tourism grants have been raised from $50,000 to $75,000. We are also continuing to offer our municipal, county, and regional planning projects, or our MCRPs. This year, we do have a separate application for those projects. So be sure that when you are looking to apply for those, you click the separate application for that grant type. The maximum grant award for that type has also been raised from $50,000 to $75,000. Eligible projects for this type of grant include preparation of design guidelines, local preservation ordinances, historic preservation components of municipal or county master plans, and architectural surveys. We are again offering our multi-phase capital funding commitments for those larger scale capital projects. You must apply for at least 2 phases of work and have a minimum request of $500,000 per phase, and the maximum request per phase cannot exceed $750,000. We are also continuing to promote our 2 special initiatives for the 2023 grant round, and those are the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution and underrepresented histories. As a quick reminder, no information submitted after the application deadline will be accepted or reviewed. There are a few exceptions, such as board resolutions and certificates of eligibility, which can be submitted up until August 1st. However, we encourage that you double and triple check all of your attachments and your application before submitting to ensure that your submitted application is fully complete. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, we are continuing to promote 2 special initiatives. The first is the semi-quincentennial, or the semi-quin, which is our 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. Although this is not until 2026, we're striving to highlight and support sites and projects that will be participating in the semi-quin. We know that a lot of sites in New Jersey have connections to the American Revolution, so we ask that you demonstrate a tangible connection to the revolution and explain to us how you would be participating in the semi-quin. This could be including new programming, events, or exhibits that you have planned for 2026 that relate to the revolution. Our second initiative is underrepresented histories. So in response to the nation's recent reckoning with racial injustices and to keep in line with New Jersey's statewide preservation plan, we are seeking to expand representation of marginalized groups and empower meaningful involvement of minority constituencies in the identification, preservation, and interpretation of historic resources. With that being said, we hope to encourage projects that promote underrepresented histories, such as Black history, civil rights history, disabilities history, Indigenous history, Latinx history, LGBTQ+ history, or the history of any other marginalized group. Some project types include capital investment or brick and mortar preservation of buildings with connection to underrepresented groups and histories, the identification and evaluation of sites through things like National Register nominations, preservation plans, archaeological research, or architectural surveys, and updates to interpretations of sites that includes marginalized histories, including exhibits and programming. More information on this special initiative can be found on the fact sheet that you see a screenshot of on the slide, and that can be found on our website, and it'll also be accessible through the application. For any project-specific questions related to these initiatives, please reach out to one of our program officers after the presentation, and we'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions. Next slide, please. Is the next slide up? My screen is a little blue.
It should be.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. This is our 5th year using the online application format. So for those of you who have applied in previous years, this information is going to sound pretty familiar to you. First, we would like to encourage you to make an account with FormSite for your application, so that way you can save and return to your application at your convenience. We do not have access to any of the usernames or passwords you create, so please write them down and keep them somewhere safe. If you don't have that information and you don't save it, you'll have to contact FormSite to retrieve that, and that would not be something that we can help you with. FormSite would have to help you relocate your username and password. We also recommend starting early, as well as reviewing the PDF or the Word versions of the application first. So that way, if you have any questions, concerns, or issues with the application at all, you can have those resolved. By looking at the PDF or Word version first, you'll also be able to see the whole application in one sweep, instead of only a few questions at a time, which is how FormSite will present it to you. The simplest way to fill out the online application is to type out all your answers on a separate document first, and then copy and paste those answers into the online application. And this will allow you to have a backup of all your answers in the event something goes wrong, your internet crashes and it doesn't save your place. You'll be able to have all those answers readily accessible and not have to go back and do things all over again. We ask that you please familiarize yourself with the attachments checklist as well for each grant type. Different applications are going to have different attachment requirements, so you want to make sure that you have the right checklist for your grant type. We recommend reviewing this right away because some of the attachments, such as governing body resolutions, will take longer to obtain than other attachments. With that being said, be sure to check your board meeting schedules now and plan accordingly. As I mentioned earlier, governing body resolutions are one of the attachments that will be accepted beyond the application deadline. However, you still will only have until August 1st to get that in. All links to the online PDF and Word versions of the applications are all available on our website. Next slide, please. So who are eligible for our grants? All applicants must fall under one of the following categories. You must be agencies or entities of county governments, agencies or entities of municipal governments, agencies or entities of state governments, or nonprofit 501c organizations that are compliant with New Jersey charitable registration laws. Our nonprofit applicants are required to submit their New Jersey charitable registration number, and we do check it for compliance. So our nonprofit applicants, please be sure to double check that you're both registered and in compliance. We do also have ownership requirements. For the HSM and Heritage Tourism grants, if the applicant does not own the property outright, they will need to provide us with a single owner assurance form or assigned owner assurance form. Basically, this shows us that the owner of the building knows that you're applying for the grant and is aware of the project scope of work. For our capital grants, if the applicant does not own the property outright or in fee simple, They must show that they have a long-term lease with a minimum of 15 years remaining at the time of application. In the event you do not have a long-term lease, you can pursue a signed owner authorization form. However, that option will come with a caveat. If you go that route, the owner of the property must be an eligible applicant in their own right, and they will also have to act as a co-signer on the grant agreement. Generally, most applicants will choose to provide the lease if they can, just because it's a lot simpler. The owner assurance page will also have to be signed by the property owner if the applicant is not the owner of the property. Our municipal, county, and regional planning grants are the exception to these ownership rules. We do not have ownership or lease requirements for this grant type. However, applicants must get the signature of the chief elected officer or official of each municipality in which the project area is located, unless the applicant owns in fee simple the resource being impacted. Next slide, please. We also have some eligibility requirements for the types of properties that we can fund. We can fund sites that are individually listed on the National or New Jersey registers. We can also fund a contributing resource in a historic district that's listed on the New Jersey or National Register. However, I do want to note that if your property is a contributing resource to a historic district, you will need to provide documentation either in the form of the nomination itself or a letter from HPO stating that it is in fact a contributing resource to the district. The final category of eligible properties is any that have been determined eligible for listing by the New Jersey Historic Preservation Office. They must be listed or certified eligible for listing by August 1st in order to qualify. It's recommended that you reach out to HPO by the beginning of March to get the ball rolling towards getting that certificate of eligibility or COE sooner rather than later if you do not already have one. For our capital applicants that are applying with the COE, you will still be considered eligible for the capital grant. However, the resource must be listed before any funds can be dispersed. I do want to mention that churches are another exception of properties that we cannot fund. Any house of religious worship that is currently an active house of religious worship is ineligible for funding. Next slide, please. Eligible activities are going to vary depending on our grant types. So the list you see in front of you broken down by each grant type is by no means a comprehensive list. This is just some examples of projects that we commonly see for each grant type. And my colleagues will go into more depth regarding any eligible activities when we go through each grant later in the presentation. As a side note, if you're questioning if your project is eligible, either you think it might not be or it's not included in any of our lists, please feel free to email us directly or call us, and hopefully we'll be able to sort out if it's eligible or not. Next slide, please. While each application has different requirements and criteria for review, I'm going to go briefly over some of the criteria that's same all across all of our grant types. The first category is the significance of the resource. We look to see what the listing status of the resource is, and we also ask if the resource is under threat of collapse, demolition, inappropriate use, or development. The next category is our project concept and team. This is where we ask questions like, is the scope of work clear, thorough, and appropriate for the resource? Is the team qualified? Is the budget realistic? And is the schedule feasible? Next slide, please. The third category is organizational ability. In this section, we'll ask questions related to the organization itself, its long-term commitment to the preservation of the resource, and the fundraising ability. We also ask if the matching funds are available, and if not, how you will gather the additional matching funds. And all these questions will help us determine whether the applicant organization is a good steward to the resource and if they can manage grants effectively. The final category that we look at is public benefit. So we want to see how this project involves and supports the local community. Some questions are, does the project represent innovative design, programming, or reach new audiences? Does the project complement other state initiatives? is there community support? And will funding make a difference in the quality of the project? Community support is extremely important and is something that our evaluators really, really like to see. So we highly recommend that applicants reach out to their legislators, local government officials, other nonprofits, or any other community members to obtain letters of support for their project, since that's something that you can include in your application. I do want to note that the trust is committed to funding projects all across the state. So we do take into consideration geographic distribution of funds with each grant round. Next slide, please. And the last thing I want to go over with all of you is the grant types for 2023. So every grant type we're offering this year, the minimum and maximum award for each type, and then the matching requirement for each type. This is just a quick breakdown, as this is something that will be talked about more later in the presentation. Our historic site management, or HSM, our heritage tourism, and our municipal, county, and regional planning grants all have the same bracket of grant requests, as well as the same match. So their minimum request amount is $5,000, and they all have a maximum request amount of $75,000. And each of those, the trust will provide a 75% match. Our capital level 1 grants have a minimum request of $5,000 and a maximum request of $150,000, and the trust will provide a 60% match to that. Our capital level 2 grants have a minimum request of $150,001 and a maximum request of $750,000, and the trust provides a 50% match. Lastly, our multi-phase capital grants have a minimum request of $500,000 and a maximum request of $750,000 per phase. There must be at least 2 phases, and the trust provides a 50% match. I see a question in the chat asking, is the match inclusive of the grant amount? So basically our matching requirement is that, for example, if you look at the capital level 2, the grant would be a 50% match. So we would, if you were requesting a, $152,000 grant, you would have to match $152,000 to our grant amount. Let's see what other question. I see there's another question. Can applications be submitted to both the HSM and HTP since the project involves both? The short answer to that is yes, you can. You can apply to multiple grants in one round. However, I will note that if you apply to both, there's no guarantee that both projects will get funded. So especially if you're considering applying for, say, a capital project, I do not recommend putting all your eggs in one basket and applying for an HSM grant at the same time for all of your construction documents, because in the chance that the HSM does not get funded for your construction documents, that's something you will have to pay out of pocket for your capital work. And that's something that
if I may add, just going back to that original question, I think, I'm not sure if the question was, should they apply for both for that one project? I think you need to pick which is the most appropriate project for the grant type. If it's a heritage tourism, then it should be a heritage tourism application. If it's not dealing with heritage tourism, it's more just a HSM, then that's one. Don't apply for both for that one project. You have to pick which one's the most appropriate. And if you're not sure about it, you can always reach out to us directly to go over the details, and we could advise you that way.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. And if there's no other questions, I think I'm going to pass things over then to Alexis, who's going to talk about all of our archaeological requirements.
Shannon. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alexis Alamy, and I'm the Trust Archaeologist and one of our historic preservation specialists. I'm going to give a very brief overview of the archaeological requirements for receiving grant funding through the Trust. Even if the primary goal of your project is not an archaeological investigation, you must consider archaeology if you have any ground disturbing activities planned. Examples of the kinds of activities necessitating the consideration of archaeology may include, but are not limited to, the installation of buried utility lines, site grading related to the construction or expansion of parking lots and sidewalks, construction of ADA compliant improvements, removal and installation of footings, installation of outdoor HVAC systems, and exterior foundation work. That said, though, the consideration of archaeology does not always equate with a full-fledged archaeological investigation. If ground disturbance is part of the scope of work for your project, you will need to consult with a qualified professional archaeologist who will evaluate your site and project plans in order to determine whether there is archaeological potential and where. They will determine whether excavation may be required and to what extent. If ground disturbance is not part of your current scope of work, you are required to, at minimum, acknowledge the archaeological potential of your site and your plans for addressing it if needed. The approach taken will ultimately need to be determined in consultation with a qualified professional archaeologist, but the following is a very general overview of the potential approaches you might expect to employ. And you never know, along with all of the artifacts you'll find, you might also unearth some great public engagement opportunities. Archaeology is a really good opportunity for you to try and engage with the people who enjoy your site so much. An archaeological management plan is highly recommended for sites that have never been investigated archaeologically. This will entail a comprehensive survey of the property to the level of detail determined by the archaeological consultant you hire. Archaeological management plans allow you to fully understand your site and will outline the areas of highest sensitivity. They will give you a good idea of where further digging may be necessary or where no further investigation is required at all, allowing you to plan future projects accordingly. The purpose of a Phase 1 survey is to identify whether there is any archaeological potential on site and where. This is typically the first stage for understanding the archaeology of your site. A Phase 2 survey may become necessary if areas of potential archaeological sensitivity have been identified and their level of significance is not fully understood. This typically entails the excavation of units, which are large square holes that allow for increased visibility of soil stratigraphy and archaeological deposits. Phase 3 surveys entail what is known as full data recovery, where a larger percentage of the site is opened up for careful excavation in order to fully understand the significant archaeology that has been identified. Monitoring is excavation by a non-archaeologist overseen by a qualified archaeologist. Monitoring as a first resort is not considered best practice, but it may be employed in select circumstances, such as on sites where there is known disturbance believed to have compromised the significance of any archaeology that may be there, or in areas that have been predetermined by an archaeologist to have low archaeological potential. The decision to utilize monitoring as your approach should be made by a qualified professional archaeologist. But what if no digging is planned for this phase of your project? Even if no digging is currently planned, the potential for archaeology must be addressed in your application, including your plans for how it will be incorporated if needed. This might be as simple as stating if any ground disturbance is to occur, a professional archaeologist will be consulted prior to excavation. We just need to see that you've considered archaeology while developing your plans and project scope. It may be beneficial to you to consider whether any of your goals may require archaeology as you consider the long-term stewardship of your site. For example, do you foresee wanting to make improvements to the foundations of any buildings on site? Or do you have long-term plans to add visitor amenities such as a bathroom? You might eventually like to add air conditioning or heat if those utilities aren't currently in place. These activities may require ground disturbance, which may eventually require the consideration of archaeology, and with a plan in place in advance, you could save time and money down the road. You may also have a research question that can only be answered by archaeology that would further enrich the knowledge you have about the history of your site and its occupants, allowing you to develop richer site narratives and even show off some genuine artifacts to your site visitors. This is another consideration for the future. Thank you for your time. And if there aren't any questions, I'm going to turn it over to Judy, who will be reviewing historic site management grants. And I don't see any questions. So on to Judy.
Hi, everyone. My name's Judy Murphy, and I'll be talking about historic site management grant applications in this section. Next slide. Eligible activities consist mainly of construction activities related to planning or rehabilitation of historic properties, such as preservation plans, feasibility studies, and historic landscape plans. Other eligible activities also include historic register nominations, strategic plans, and fundraising plans. HSM grants provide a 3-to-1 funded match where the trust provides up to 75% and the applicant provides at least 25% of the total project cost. It's not necessary to have your full match in hand at the time of application. However, you must demonstrate the ability to provide the required match to complete the project. You should discuss in the application your fundraising plan and include details about the potential funded sources, such as a county grant program or planned fundraising events. There are a few requirements that you should be aware of before applying for a HSM grant. Owner consent is required. So if you do not own the property that is the subject of your grant application, the property owner must sign the owner assurance form. An exception to this rule is for a historic district nomination. The owner assurance form must be signed by the chief elected official for each municipality that falls within the boundaries of your proposed project area, not every property owner in the proposed district. The work must be completed within 2 years after the funds are appropriated, and you must acknowledge funding assistance in all published materials. If your resource is not currently listed in the New Jersey or National Registers of Historic Places, we strongly encourage you to make that one of the goals of your project. Remember, if you plan to come to us for capital funds, your resource must be listed in the register. Next, we will discuss the different application sections. The first 4 sections ask for basic information about your project and organization. The last 5 sections focus on the evaluation criteria. These are the sections you want to have prepared by someone who really knows your project and your organization. Eligibility questions. This first part of the application is just making sure you're at the right spot. Are you an eligible applicant? Do you have an eligible resource? Do you have permission from the property owner? Next is the project summary. We ask for a project title, something simple such as Preservation Plan for Historic Schoolhouse. You're also going to tell us the amount of your grant request and the total project cost. In this section, you're going to give us a brief project description. You should refer to the specific eligible activities included in your project, such as preservation plan, landscape plan, nomination. You will also have the opportunity to expand on your project description in another section. So keep this description in this section brief, just a couple of sentences. That's all we need in here. Applicant information. Here you're going to list a contact for your organization. This person should be very familiar with your project. This person will be the one that we contact to set up a site visit, and the person will call if we have any questions about your project. If you are a nonprofit applicant, you will need to submit your IRS tax exempt letter and provide your current New Jersey charitable registration number. All applicants need to provide a governing board resolution that authorizes and designates a single person to sign the applicant assurance form. We do provide a sample resolution. However, local governments may use their own resolution format. Just keep in mind that it must authorize the application and include the exact amount of the grant request and matching funds to be provided. All applications must include a signed applicant assurance form, signed by the authorized representative as identified in the governing board resolution. Property ownership. An owner assurance form is only required when you, the applicant, do not own the subject property of the application. As mentioned before, if the application is for a historic district nomination, the owner assurance must be signed by the chief elected official for each municipality that falls within the boundaries of the proposed project area, not every property owner. Now we're getting into the sections that focus on the 5 review criteria. This section focuses on the property and its significance. Historic property name. We want you to use the historic name for the property as it is listed by the New Jersey Historic Preservation Office. You can check their website to determine what name to use. If your project includes more than one property, you should choose one as a reference property. You'll be able to list all the properties in a separate question. Please include the physical property address and provide a link to a Google map. This will help us locate your property for the site visit. Historic register status. Tell us whether the property is listed on the state or national register. Is it listed individually or contributing to a historic district? Is your property is not listed, remember that it needs to be certified eligible by the State Historic Preservation Office by August 1st, 2023. Historic significance. In this section, you will tell us why this resource is important to preserve. Include information on the date it was built, the architectural style, and the builder if known. History of the property's use. This is where we want to know what the property was built as, what is it currently being used as, and what the future use is proposed to be. We want you to describe the change in use of the property over time. Ownership and applicant history. Here we want to know when you acquired the property, either through ownership or lease, and what your stewardship history is with the property. And be honest with the stewardship history. If you haven't been the best steward of the property in the past, tell us what has changed with your organization and how that change will improve your stewardship in the future. Current condition and preservation need. In this section, you will identify whether the property is currently occupied and the general conditions of the property, including any structural issues. You will also identify in this section any threats to the resources, such as development pressure or inappropriate use. The next section focuses on details of the project and the team that you assembled. Goals of the project. This is where you can expand on the brief project description above. Clearly identify the problems and needs of the site that will be addressed with this project. If you are including a proposal from your consultant, reference it here. You do not need to cut and paste a proposal into this section. Just summarize it in your own words. Trust me, we will read the proposal. Identify all activities included in the project. Include the proposed scope of work. Again, reference to consultant's proposal if you are including one. Project status. Tell us where you are in the process. Have you hired consultants or are you just preparing a request for proposals now? If you have selected your consultants, you will need to include their resume and credentials. If you are preparing an RFP, you will need to include a description of the qualifications you are looking for in a consultant. And finally, you will include the proposed fees and estimates in this section. Project budget and matching funds. In this section, you will give us a detailed list of work products and associated costs. You will also identify the project total cost, the amount of your grant request, and the required matching funds split between how much you have in hand and how much you plan to raise. Remember that historic site management grants do not allow for match expended. And we define this as money spent prior to the application deadline of April 19th, 2023. If you choose to move forward with your project after the application deadline, you can, but remember that there are no guarantees that you will be awarded a grant. And if you do choose to move forward, you should keep the program officer assigned to your application in the loop to make sure you are following our program requirements. Document and match in hand. Nonprofits will need to provide account statements or funding commitment letters. and local governments will need to provide a resolution committing specific matching funds. Organizational ability. Here we are looking for information about your organization, such as its size and mission statement. We want to know if you have a cyclical maintenance plan for your property and who is responsible for the routine maintenance, and if you have a maintenance fund. We also want to know what experience your organization has with managing grants and working with consultants. You will need to identify who from your organization will be managing this grant and providing project oversight. You will need to identify all relevant prior grants managed and explain the status of any open grants. Nonprofits will need to include an operating budget and balance sheet. Climate change. This question is not just for coastal resources. If you are near a river or stream, or if you have a lot of surrounding trees that are susceptible to winds or other extreme weather events, we want to know how you are making your resource better prepared to deal with these events. In this section, we also ask about continuing education and professional development of your staff. Examples are best practice workshops and the New Jersey History and Historic Preservation Conference. Public access and benefit. In this final section, we want to know how your project will benefit the community. Will there be increased visitation or accessibility? Is this project planning for future capital work? Special initiatives. This is the section where you would identify how your project meets the special initiatives discussed earlier. Current public access and interpretation. We want to know if you are open with regular hours or by appointment only. Do you charge an entrance fee? Are you ADA accessible? If your organization collects visitation numbers, let us know. And finally, you may get some extra points if you participate in a state or federal heritage initiative, such as Certified Local Government, Journey Through Jersey, or the Main Street Program. Now I'm going to talk about the municipal, county, and regional planning grants, and we'll just hold questions until the end of the heritage tourism section as well, since a lot of these grants have overlap in features. Next. So there are 4 major eligible activities. One is the preparation of design guidelines. 2 is the preparation or revision of a local historic preservation ordinance. 3 is the preparation of historic preservation components to a municipal or county master plan. And 4 is the preparation of an architectural survey to identify historic properties. These are all activities that have previously been funded through the HSM grant application in the past, but as Shannon mentioned, this year we've pulled it out as a separate application with its own set of criteria. Now, if a planning document or activity other than those mentioned is proposed, just please call staff to talk if it's an eligible activity. Okay, the MCRP grant application is very similar to the HSM application, but here we're going to identify some of the major differences. With property ownership, MCRP grant applications do not need to demonstrate ownership. The signature of the chief elected official for each municipality in which the project area is located is required. Property information and historic significance. At least one resource in the project area must be listed or certified eligible for listing in the New Jersey or National Register of Historic Places. In this section, you will need to identify any previous and current preservation planning efforts of the community, as well as any existing preservation planning documents, including their date of adoption. Project concept and team. So in addition to requesting information on the proposed consultants for the project, we ask you to give us details on the local Historic Preservation Commission if you have one. Organizational ability. Here you will identify any other stakeholders groups involved with the project, such as historical societies or Main Street organizations. You will also need to discuss how this project will promote stewardship and maintenance of historic resources by private owners. Public access and benefits. Here we want to know how much community involvement and support there is for the project. Will the project increase awareness of the community's history? And how will the project increase public participation in the community's preservation efforts and planning process? Now, all MCRP applications will be reviewed based on the following criteria you see here. Now, these review criteria are similar to the criteria for the HSM grant application, with the exception of 3. And those are the degree to which the project promotes stewardship and maintenance of historic resources by private owners, the degree to which the project fosters the goals and objectives of the New Jersey Comprehensive Statewide Historic Preservation Plan, and the degree to which the applicant involves the community in the preservation process. So that concludes MCRP, and now we'll move into heritage tourism grants. Ashley Parker is our heritage tourism specialist in the office, but she's not able to be with us today, so I'm going to go over this section for her. Okay. The heritage tourism application is, again, very similar to the HSM application with a few differences. One of the main differences is eligible activities. So these are the activities that we consider to be heritage tourism: visitor readiness assessments, visitor evaluation and/or development of performance evaluation measures, interpretive planning for one of multiple sites and/or the development and enhancement of linkages between sites, design and fabrication or interpretive signage or literature. So we are not looking to replace existing brochures, but rather new designs or fabrication. Marketing plans or studies, design and fabrication of marketing materials, and training and workshops that create, foster, or enhance linkages between sites. This means you are hiring someone to speak with your organization or even several organizations to develop linkages between sites. If there is something that you have in mind that is not listed, please contact Ashley to determine if it's an eligible activity. Criteria for review. So additionally, there are a few more review standards that the trust considers when reviewing heritage tourism applications. In addition to the criteria for review mentioned before, we will also take into consideration if the project enhances or benefits the visitor experience at the resource, fosters the goals and objectives of the New Jersey Heritage Tourism Master Plan, addresses the development of an exhibiting heritage tourism plan, or if it aims to create a broader regional tourism plan or initiative. The applicant builds upon the proposal and continues to foster heritage tourism, has the potential to reach new audiences, has the potential to promote other cultural and heritage activities, and creates links between multiple sites. These are some specific aspects of the heritage tourism application that is different from the HSM application. For the property information and historic significance section, at least one resource must be listed or certified eligible in the New Jersey or National Register of Historic Places, either individually or as a contributing resource to a historic district. If your project is for more than one property, choose a reference property that does meet the property information and historic significance requirements. There are no ownership or lease requirements, but you must submit owner assurances demonstrating support for the project. Under project concept and team, we ask that you check to make sure that the project is consistent with the New Jersey Heritage Tourism Master Plan, and if it is links to a broader regional heritage tourism initiative. Again, with respect to public access and benefit, Is your site visitor ready? For example, do you have regular hours, bathrooms, or a parking lot? If you are visitor ready, provide documentation in attachment G. So that concludes the heritage tourism section. Later in the presentation, Vito will go over what is required in the attachment section and how to set your application apart. So right now, we'll see if there's any questions for HSM, MCRP, or HT grant applications. So Vito, did you get any questions?
There are no questions at this time in the chat.
Okay, great. So right now we'll pass it over to Glenn Saponis, who's going to talk about capital applications.
Thank you, Judy. Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Glenn Saponis, and I'll be reviewing capital applications. First, begin by reviewing kind of general information and requirements for capital grants. Then I'll go through the application itself. So even if you are applying for one of our planning grants this year, you want to pay attention to this capital presentation, because you may be coming to us next year. So this will kind of give you a heads up on what to expect when you start filling out that application, and what to, I guess, somewhat prepare for during your planning exercises. Also, once I finish this section, Vito will discuss all the attachments for not just capital, but as Judy said, for all the planning grants. Anyway, I hope you stick with us. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Sorry. All right, so eligible activities under capital grants. Again, they're construction activities for the most part. Includes preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, reconstruction. If you're providing barrier-free access as part of the ADA, we might be including interpretive signage, or also you'll be required to put a project sign up on your site. Other construction activities include archaeology, even though, as Alexis mentioned earlier, could also be a planning grant. Under construction grants, we count it as a construction activity. This way, it doesn't take away from the non-construction limit that you have for construction grants, which I'll talk about very briefly. Also with archaeology, again, as Alexis mentioned, and any ground disturbance, we're going to require that you consider archaeology as part of the project. So you want to make sure that you include a budget line in it as part of your activities. What you don't want to happen is to get a grant for construction. Also, we say, wait, you have ground disturbing activities. Where's your archaeologist? And all of a sudden, that wasn't part of your budget. It'll have to come out of some part of the overall budget. So make sure that, again, when you're considering your construction activity, there's going to be any ground disturbance, to make sure that there's an archaeologist on board, or at least some sort of archaeological consideration and budget line item. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about budget as I continue. As I did mention, non-construction activities that are directly related to a capital project are eligible under construction grants. They are limited to 20% of the project budget. Typically, we'll see this mainly with construction administration from your consultant who's overseeing, designing and overseeing the project, but it might also include construction documents or schematic designs, specifications. Again, remember that, again, non-construction activities are limited to 20% of the project budget. New construction and visitor amenity, that is also an eligible activity under construction. Now, to be compelling, a compelling project under visitor amenity, you'll have to justify that the visitor amenity is the appropriate project for your site at this time. If your site, your resource still requires preservation or restoration activities, your roof is leaking, perhaps a visitor amenity is not the appropriate project for you at this time. And perhaps, it would be looked at as a bit premature if you came to us for a visitor amenity when the rest of the resource still needs some work. So that's one thing that we're looking at when you come to us for a visitor amenity. Basically, is this the right project for your site at this time is the question that we're asking. Again, visitor amenities could be ADA restrooms, parking areas, site lighting, etc. Again, anything that basically makes your site more visitor ready would be a visitor amenity. The non-construction, again, 20%. Construction fees, again, construction documents are part of that. Next slide, please. The matching funds. Unlike the planning grants, the match is definitely different here. I mean, matching at 75-25 under planning grants. For capital grants, depends on the size of the grant request you're making. So grants between 5,000 and 150,000, it's a 60-40 match. We provide 60, we provide 40. Basically, what that comes down to is that if it's a $250,000 project, we're providing 150,000 the max, and you're providing 100,000, the 40%. Grants, level 2 grants are above 150 up to 750,000, and that's a 50-50 match. So again, for a $750,000 grant, it's a $1.5 million project. Regarding where match comes from, special state appropriations or monies derived from the corporate business tax, CBT, which is where our funding comes from, are not eligible as match for nonprofit organizations or county and municipal governments. State governments, again, that's typically their only source of funding, so that is allowable. But for nonprofits and county municipal governments, you cannot use either special state appropriations, line items from the budget, or monies derived from the corporate business tax, say Green Acres funding or something like that. Other sources of match, though, are federal and county grants. They're eligible for matches, as well as if private donations, if you do fundraisers. I mean, those are all eligible as part of your match. Match expended limitations, unlike planning grants, for capital grants, you can actually have match expended as part of your grant. Basically, it's monies spent prior to April 19th of 2023, so before the application is due, for the past 2 years. So anything between April 19th, 2021 and April 19th, 2023 could qualify as match expended. The caveats there are it cannot exceed 25% of the total project cost, and it needs to be directly related to the project that you're coming to funding for. So say you're coming for exterior restoration of your historic resource. Well, you've already put the roof on because it was leaking so bad, it was doing damage, so you did that within that 2-year time frame. Well, that's part of exterior restoration, so we would consider that part of this project as well. So, but there has to be a connection between the two. The other thing to keep in mind too is that all work, match expended, work that's already done or stuff that's being proposed, must meet the Secretary of Interior standards. If you do provide match expended, we'll require documentation of that under attachment E, which I'll get to in a little bit. Yeah, next slide, please. So there are certain requirements that go along with getting a capital grant. One is control of the property. Again, if you must either own the property in fee simple or have a long-term lease. And by long-term lease, we're requiring at least 15 years remaining on the lease by the time that the funds are appropriated. So figure by December of this year, you still need to have 15 years on your lease to be for it to be compliant with our requirements. We will also ask for you to submit the lease in attachment B of the attachment section. The lease cannot be revoked at will. The lease should also provide language basically allowing you as the lessee to actually make improvements to the building. That's part of the point of the lease is that you've been given approval by the owner to actually make improvements to the building, and the lease should should reflect that. If you don't have a long-term lease, and I'll get into this a little bit more, but there is an option for assigned owner authorization. So the key with that is, again, as Shannon mentioned earlier, is that the owner needs to also be an eligible applicant to our grants. It can't just be a private homeowner that will sign because you want to do work on their property. It has to be someone who's eligible for our grant program, and they will actually have to then sign, be a co-signatory on the grant agreement if you do get the grant. Other requirements is that the project timetable, again, the agreement must be in place within 18 months. The work must begin within 2 years of the date of the appropriation. And also something that's important to keep in mind is that there are audit requirements for capital grants, actually for all of the grants, but you see it more so in capital because of the amount of money being received. And basically for any entity receiving more than $100,000 from either the state or combined with state or federal grants in their fiscal year, any one fiscal year, will be required to do an audit. Typically, it's a yellow book audit if it's under 750,000, but anything over $100,000 will require an audit. The key part to this is that audits are not reimbursable expenses as part of our program. So if you're coming to us for a $750,000 grant and that's going to be basically received within one fiscal year, you're going to be required to provide an audit after that fiscal year. So you need to start budgeting since it's not a reimbursable request, in your regular budget. All right, next, please. Other requirements dealing with the capital grant. Again, as I said, always have to meet the Secretary of Interior standards, match expended, future work, all of it that needs to meet the standards. A big difference regarding reimbursement conditions with the HSM, the planning grants, heritage tourism, that we provide reimbursements in kind of two tranches. One, an initial after you make an initial payment, and the second 20% at the end. So it's a bit of an advance based on an initial payment. With construction grants, it's a completely different case. I mean, it's really based on reimbursements. You need to basically spend the money before you get any of our money. And I'm going to get into a little bit of weeds here, just because since it is a reimbursement, you're spending money first. It could be a cash flow issue down the road. So keep in mind that if you submit a reimbursement to us for you spend funds in a specific period for a certain amount, we're going to take that amount and we have a multiplier. For level ones, it's 0.57. For level twos, it's 0.475. Basically what this is it's our portion of the match, either 60 or 50% minus retains that we hold. And we use that multiplier and we multiply the amount of your cost for that period. And that's the amount of the check that you're going to get, is that multiplier. So if you're expecting, you spent $100,000, you're expecting $100,000 back. No, you'll be getting either 60 or 50% of that. Again, that's counting our match plus your match for the total. Again, from a reimbursement standpoint, that from a cash flow standpoint is very important. So keep in mind that you're not getting the full amount of after you spend the money. So that's the big difference between the planning grants and the capital grants. Other requirements dealing with capital grants. The project sign, we do require that during construction that there's a project sign that basically gives credit to the New Jersey Trust as well as the state and the fund that this comes from. That needs to be, and we give you all the specs and details for that. But that's a requirement of a capital grant. Also, if you're a nonprofit agency receiving a grant, or at least if the property itself is owned by a nonprofit, and you get a grant, a capital grant over $50,000, we're going to require a term easement be placed on that property. Again, this helps protect the state investment. And the term of that easement is based upon the size of the grant. So again, if it's over 50,000 up to 100,000, there'll be a 15-year easement. Over 100,000 up to 450,000, it's a 20-year easement. And if it's over 450,000, then it'll be a 30-year easement. And again, basically, we're making sure that the state's investment on whatever we've already repaired or restored, stays in good shape. But also, if you're coming to us, if you want to do something to those items in the future, we want to make sure that that work meets the Secretary of Interior standards. So again, you'll be submitting requests for approval to us, again, to make sure that all work is meeting during that term of the easement. Capital grants also require a permanent sign or plaque. Again, these are for all capital grants over $50,000. It could be your standard bronze plaque, but you can also incorporate the wording required into an interpretive sign. Actually, I think we prefer that instead of just having a bunch of additional signage. If you're already doing interpretation on the site, include the basically recognition of the funding source as well as why the property is significant into your interpretive sign, and they'll take care of that permanent sign or plaque requirement in the for capital grants. Next, please. So similar to Judy, I'm going to go through basically the application sections. We are switching over to the actual application now. And the first 4 sections are similar, are basics sections that require filling out some answers, where the last 5 sections is basically the bulk of the application itself, and that relates directly to the evaluation criteria that our evaluators are going to be reviewing. So first section is eligibility questions, property summary, project summary, application information, property ownership, and then the property information, historic significance, concept and team, the project budget, organization's ability, both to manage as well as to be stewards, and again, public access and benefit. Again, similar criteria to what you've heard already. Next slide, please. So the section dealing with eligibility questions. Again, this is just to see, is this grant program correct for what you're trying to do? Are you an eligible applicant? Is this an eligible resource? Again, if you have any questions regarding on whether this is the right program for you, always reach out to trust staff. We'll be happy to discuss it with you directly if there's any questions. But if as you fill this out, if any red flags are going up, please reach out to us before you get too deep into the application. The next section deals with project summary. Again, here we're looking for basically a brief title. It could just be exterior restoration of old schoolhouse. I mean, it could be a title. We're looking for also the grant request. How much are you requesting for the grant, and what is the project total budget as well? The next part is a brief narrative, and we are saying kind of brief here. Again, this is part of the project summary. We're emphasizing summary. Just quickly, we're going to be replacing the roof and doing exterior restoration, including painting and window repairs. Something brief, just so the evaluators have a quick idea of what your project is. There are plenty of opportunities later in the application to get into details when we start talking about scope of work and that type of thing. So in this part, please keep it brief. Next, please. So the next part, the next section deals with the applicant information. Again, we're asking for the organization's information, project contact, organization website. As Judy mentioned, project contact is very important because if we have any questions regarding the application, we want that person to be knowledgeable about the project. They also have to be accessible. If we're trying to set up, either get answers or set up a site visit, they have to be able to get back to us. So whoever that project contact is the person that we'll be reaching out to. So anyway, make sure that they are accessible and can get back to us. Also, during this, all nonprofits need to provide us with their IRS letter showing that they are tax exempt. We'll ask you to basically put this in attachment A, which again, Vita will go over in more detail after my presentation. The current charitable registration number. This comes from the Division of Consumer Affairs and Charity Registration. Again, make sure you're compliant. There are some exceptions based on income, but we do want all nonprofits registered through New Jersey to charity registration if possible. We recommend that you go on their website, make sure you are currently compliant. If you don't know if you're have that number because it's been a while, again, it's worthwhile to check to make sure you are compliant because we're going to be requiring that. Government, both county and municipal, need to provide a resolution authorizing the application as well as saying how much the exact amount of matching funds are if you do get the grant. We understand that your commitment can only be if you receive the grant, and that wording is fine, but we do want to make sure that government agencies are committed to the match if they do get the grant. Next, please. Next section deals with the property ownership. Again, going through if the applicant is the owner, applicant and owner are the same people, then you only need to sign the applicant assurances. If the applicant does not own the property but has that long-term lease, then the owner signs the owner assurances and the applicant signs the applicant assurances. If you're in the case where you don't have the 15-year lease, then the applicant will sign the applicant assurances, but then we'll also need to get the owner authorization. Again, the owner needs to be someone who's eligible for our grant program in their own right and would be a co-signer of the grant agreement. Typically, we see this through like DEP and Friends groups, where there may not be a 15-year lease. But again, the important part there is that, in this case, DEP is an eligible applicant as a state agency, and they are also agreeing to be basically a co-signatory on the grant agreement itself. Next, please. So now we're getting into basically the bulk of the application, as well as basically the 5 criteria that the evaluators are utilizing to evaluate your application. Again, here we're asking for the historic property name. Again, this is hopefully coming off the National Register nomination. It's what the HPO has determined to be the historic name of the property. We're also asking for National Register status. Is it on the National or State Register? Is it individually listed, or is it contributing to a historic district? Or at this point, do you just have a COE? It's just been certified eligible. And it has been mentioned previously by Shannon that for capital grants, to actually receive capital funds, you need to be listed on the state or national register. COE is not enough to receive those capital funds. It's enough to apply, but one thing that the evaluators should be looking for is, do you have a plan in place to get that building listed? It's already being reviewed by HPO, and it's going to be before the state review board at their next meeting. Or have you not started yet? If you haven't started, I mean, we've been hearing it's basically a year or more process to get a building listed on the state or national register. So if that's the case, perhaps you might want to think about coming to us for a planning grant to actually get it listed, and then come back later for a capital grant once it is listed. Because if there's no plan, or it looks as it's going to take a year or two to get it listed, that may not be as compelling to our evaluators to get a construction grant, since we can't actually physically give you any money until it's listed. We're also asking about the historic significance and the history of the building. Again, we're not looking for long pages or long paragraphs, because you'll be including the nomination in the attachments summary of why your building is significant and what is its brief history is what we're looking for here. We also ask about its use history. What was it used for historically, and what is its current use now? As well as its condition. Is it occupied, unoccupied? What's the general condition? And again, if things are in poor condition, how long has it been that way? Or when did you acquire the property? Did you have something to do with it? If not, again, you could have a change of administration, and now also this is a very important property to your community, and you're willing to start moving on it. We just want to know, basically its current condition, why it's in that condition that it is now, as well as any threats to the resource. These could be current condition, where the roof's about to collapse, or there's other structural issues, or it could be kind of outside threats. Perhaps you're in a community that is being heavily developed, and there's been lots of tear downs, and you're afraid that this will be next on a developer's list. So you're trying to restore the property so that it's no longer vulnerable. Next slide, please. The next section deals with the project concept and team. You should you're asked briefly to describe basically the specific project and the grant, what the grant funds are going to go towards. What are the goals of the project, basically. We're also asking you for the scope of work form and budget worksheet. These are 2 forms that I'll talk about a little bit more, but follow the CSI divisions broken down by construction division. We're asking you too, is this a standalone project or part of a larger project? Most are standalone projects, but there are times when this is a much larger project that you just come to us just for this piece of it. Is this a multi-phase project? And I'll get into a little bit more multi-phase, what's expected with that. But again, remember that those multi-phase projects are minimum of $500,000 per phase, and up to $750,000 per phase. So again, if you're looking at each phase needs to be a minimum of $1 million project in order to qualify for the multi-phase project. We're asking you also for project specific, just, is it an interior exterior work? What treatment approach? Is it rehabilitation? Is it preservation? Is it restoration? Are you including any non-construction activities in this? And again, typically we'll see that with construction administration by your consultant, your designer, but there may be other non-construction activities included. We also ask you to kind of substantiate what your project is based on. What planning documents have you completed to date in order to say that this is the proper project right now for this resource? Do you have a preservation plan, a historic structure report? Maybe there's a condition assessment done. All of these are basically guiding your construction project at this point in time, and that's what the evaluator is looking for. It's like, how did you come up with this project? Oh, we've done this planning project and we've prioritized, and these are the priorities right now that our planning documents have illustrated, making for this construction project. So again, we're looking for you to provide that documentation in the attachment section to substantiate why this is the right project for you at this time. The scope statement, again, there's a capital scope worksheet, a form for you to fill out based on the CSI divisions. Now it's going to correspond to with the budget worksheet. We also ask for your current project status. Have you received proposals from consultants who are designing this? Perhaps you already have them under contract and they're already working on the construction documents. Do you have proposed cost estimates? Is it from an architect? Is it from a professional cost estimator? Is it just something that our engineer thinks it's going to be this much, but there's not based on anything? We need to know what those cost estimates are, where they're coming from, who's providing them, and also, as we mentioned earlier, archaeological considerations. If there's going to be any ground disturbance, let us make sure you include in there that yes, we're going to hire a professional archaeologist to oversee this, or if it's a roof job and there's not going to be any, then let us know that you've at least thought about archaeology and you do not foresee that as part of your project. But again, if there's going to be any ground disturbance, we're going to require some for you to address archaeology in some way, shape, or form. Next, please. Again, the project budget and matching funds is part of the application. We're asking you for, again, the grant request. You put it in the summary early on, but now, again, we're going back. And again, they should match. Make sure you go back and look. We've had it where we've gotten two different numbers. So it's always important to make sure you read through it. I think Vito's going to talk about this, but go through your application completely. Make sure there's no typos and computer errors like that. But anyway, in this section, we're asking for the grant request. The minimum match requirement, again, that's either that 50-50 or 60-40. That's the minimum that you need to provide. But if it is a larger project, there may be additional monies required to complete that. So that's that additional match required to complete the project. We want to know what that number is as well. Also, in this section, you're documenting your match in hand. If you're a nonprofit, you're providing account statements, your budget and your balance sheet. If you've already received perhaps a county grant, perhaps you have a letter saying that you're getting this amount, provide that to document that you do have this match in hand. And if you're a county municipal government, that government body resolution basically committing the match if you do get the grant in the future. If you're documenting match expended, again, reminder, no more than 25% of the total project cost. And again, the work needs to have been completed between April 19th of 2021 and April 19th of 2023. Anything after the due date for the application is considered proposed work, not match expended. We'll also, as match expended, we'll want to see both signed contracts, invoices, proof of payment, before and after photos. Again, we want to make sure that all your work has met the Secretary standards. And eventually you're going to get, if it is eligible and does qualify, you'll be getting reimbursed for that. So again, we'll need all those documents of invoices, proof of payments, et cetera, et cetera. Now, match in hand is not required to apply. But again, the concern is always if you do get the grant and you don't have any match, how will the project move forward? So the more that you can show that you actually have match in hand, or at least a plan for getting that match together. The evaluators are going to want to see that to make sure that, again, if they recommend you guys for a grant, that grant will likely move forward because the monies are there, between our grant and your match. So if you don't have your match in hand, explained in the application on where that match is coming from and be realistic. Anyway, next slide, please. So the actual project budget, there is budget worksheets that we want you to fill out and basically put in the attachment section. This corresponds directly with the scope of worksheet, the work form that we've given you, and it's all broken down by construction divisions. And we provide a link to the CSI divisions, in the application itself. Again, if you're dealing with a historic architect, engineer, whatever, they're familiar with these divisions, and they can be helping you. Again, if you're getting cost estimates, they're always broken down by construction division as well. But we want you to fill out this budget worksheet based on those divisions. If it's a multi-phase project, each phase should have its own worksheet based on that phase, and you should supply us with an overall project budget as well. Combination of each phase of work. So with the budget worksheet, just real quickly, you'll see columns for match expended. You'll see columns for proposed. Kind of that total as well as non-eligible costs. As I said earlier, the match expended are things spent prior to the date the application is due. So those are expenses prior to April 19th as far back as April 19th of 2021, 2 years. Proposed is anything that takes place that gets billed after the application comes to us. So most of your work is going to be proposed work, not match expended. And as Judy mentioned, if you're able to start the work prior to hearing about the grant, again, that's still considered proposed work, even though by the time you get the grant, it may be done. It's not match expended, it's proposed. Anything after April 19th is proposed work. But also keep them, whoever the program officer is that's been reviewing the application, keep them in the loop. The last thing you want to do is do all this work and for us to come say, well, that doesn't meet the standards, we can't reimburse for that. So make sure that we're in the loop if you are able to move forward before you hear about the grant. All right, next, please. Oh. I'm sorry, I just got mesmerized by something that I'm hypnotized to, I think, for Fun and Fury. Our upcoming conference, by the way, this June. There's a bit of a plug, I guess. The next section deals with organization's ability. Again, this is about your organization. We're asking you questions about your staff, your board, your volunteers, your mission statement. We want your operating budget and balance sheet, only for nonprofits. Government agencies do not provide this. We also want to know about experience managing grants and working with consultants, both your organization as well as whoever your project contact is going to be. Sometime the organization maybe didn't have that experience, but you just hired a new person who's your project contact and they've their last job. That's what they did. They manage grants. So make sure, even if it's not your organization, that you include that, because that is important experience. But use both the organization's experience as well as the project contact if they're different. We're also looking at your cyclical maintenance plan and your stewardship capabilities. What kind of stewards have you been over time? Climate change, again, building resiliency, not just shore towns. It's people near rivers that have addressed flooding issues, high winds, and you're in a wooded area. Again, how have you addressed climate change? It's important. When you do preservation plans, we're asking you these questions because it does affect your resource. So we do want you to address that in the application as well. In this section, we're also asking about continuing education and professional development. Have you attended trust best practices workshops that we did with the Historical Commission? Have you, again, attended the History and Historic Preservation Conference like Fun and Fury down in Atlantic City this June? Other continuing education and historic preservation classes like at Rutgers Camden through the March program, maybe the Bucks County program also has preservation programs, or any other kind of professional. Again, has your team been keeping up with what's going on in the world of preservation and keeping up on best practices? That's what we're looking to see in this section. Next, please. And finally, the last section is public access and benefit. Again, here we're looking for, are you open regular hours? What are they? What's your annual visitation? Do you charge an entry fee or not? Do you anticipate any community benefit from this project? But even if it's not for this project, just how do you foresee your benefit to the community? What's your accessibility as far as ADA accessibility? Do you provide public interpretation? Are there tours that are given? Do you expect any increased visitation because of this project? And how are you planning for future capital work as well? We also ask about heritage initiative areas, whether you're in a certified local government, perhaps a scenic byway, perhaps a federal or state heritage area, the Women's Heritage Trail, or Crossroads of the American Revolution. We provide links to these in the application, so if you're not sure, go to those websites and see if you fall within that. Again, we're always trying to link various different historic resources together, so if you're part of that, we want to know it. And finally, special initiatives. Do you meet either of the two special initiatives, the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution or underrepresented histories? As Shannon mentioned earlier, we do provide basically kind of a link to explain what we mean by underrepresented histories. And again, with 250th, even if your building isn't 250 years old, perhaps you're planning to do exhibits dealing to mark the 250th anniversary, or somehow you're linking with other resources. If you're doing something that relates to the 250th, here's a section for you to address it in the application. And again, same for underrepresented histories. Even if this project is not exploring those underrepresented histories, perhaps all of a sudden you're realizing that there is more history that they knew about, and you're doing more exhibits, you're doing other stuff. Let us know that you're actually now embracing some of those underrepresented histories in your past. All right, well, that I think wraps up my section. I know there are some questions that we could go over. We could do that, and then Vito will take over to go over attachments and how to make your application stand out. So what do we have for
so the first question, I'll go easiest to longest here. Are there grants that require a National Registry nomination rather than a New Jersey State Registry nomination? So I think they're looking for clarification about the difference between the two registers.
Yeah, I mean, the way that our legislation is written is it says you need to be listed on the New Jersey Register. 99%, if not more, of resources that are listed on the state register are also listed on the national register. There are a few exceptions where one's on one, but one not on the other. If you're on either, it qualifies for our program.
Okay, we have, if construction were to begin after April 19th, 2023, would they be able to get reimbursed for those construction expenses?
The short answer is, I mean, if it's part of your grant application, if you've listed all those items as part of construction, and if they're eligible and they're meeting the standards, yes, that's why I said that if you are able to move forward after April 19th, make sure you keep whoever reviewed your application in the loop, just to make sure that, again, you're not going to follow with, wait, that wasn't in your application. We're not going to be able to reimburse for that. So keep us in the loop to make sure that things are meeting the standards, and they will be eligible if you do get the grant.
Okay, we have a question regarding the project concept and teams. For mechanical systems replacement projects, are consultants required?
Yeah, I mean, we typically, we want professionals involved in your project. Is it the right system? I mean, for one thing, if it's a house museum and you have artifacts in there, does your current system take into consideration humidity and other factors? So typically, and this you'll see if you're doing a preservation plan, there is a kind of a HVAC component where they're bringing in a mechanical engineer to assess these things to make sure that it is the appropriate system for your resource. So if it's a simple, we just need a new boiler, I'm not sure how compelling that's going to be compared to some of these other applications when it's much more in-depth dealing with the rehabilitation of a full building. It is an eligible activity, but typically we see if it's simply a boiler replacement part of a larger project. I don't know if I'm reading too much into that question, but we do want professionals involved to oversee, to make sure it's the right system for your resource and that's being installed correctly. You know, we want, again, oversight. Same thing with design with historic architects. We want them involved to oversee things, perhaps engineers, depending on what the project is. But the short answer is yes.
Okay. We have, do any of the New Jersey Historic Trust grant programs support acquisition costs?
Not our grant programs, no. We do, our revolving loan program does allow for acquisition, but that's the loan program. It's not a grant program. You might also want to look into Green Acres, because they do provide acquisition costs, and they do have a component that deals with historic resources as well, not just recreation. So if you are looking for other, you know, kind of the acquisition cost sources, Green Acres might be a source for that. But we do not, only under our revolving loan fund.
We have, for a capital construction grant, if their facility is located in a historic district and the property is recognized as contributing to the character of the district, do they still need to be listed separately on the New Jersey Register?
No, as long as you're again, either individually listed or contributing to a district. You just need to make sure that your nomination actually says that you do contribute. Early nominations don't always say contributing, non-contributing. And if it doesn't designate it, we're going to ask you actually to look to, you know, HPO to make sure that, you know, they'll look at it to say it does contribute or not. It does have to contribute as part of a district, but does not have to be individually listed.
Okay, and then last one, can you quickly explain the capital grant reimbursement process again?
Yeah. So again, with capital grants, it is a truly reimbursement program, which means you have to spend the money first before you get any of our funds for it. And basically, we have a multiplier that you know, for level 1 it's 0.57, for level 2s it's 0.475. And what that multiplier designates is basically it's our portion of the grant minus 5% of our portion of the grant that we hold as retainage, and that you'll get back once you do close out. We hold that 5% to the very end to make sure that we get everything we need to close out the grant. But basically, it's our portion of the grant, either 60% or 40% that you're getting back as part of your reimbursement. So if you take that multiplier, say you spent $100,000 in you know, your first quarter of work, you submit that for reimbursement. We're gonna, and let's say you're a you know, well, level 1, we're going to multiply that 100,000 times 0.57, and that's going to be your reimbursement amount. And I don't have a calculator here, so I can tell you what that amount is, but it's not the full 100,000 you're getting. You're getting the amount of that multiplier. So that basically is saying that you're putting your part of the match in, and this is our part of a match for that specific time period. Hopefully that helps explain it.
And we have one more question that just came in. How does the Historic Trust capital grant different from the grant in SAGE currently, which I believe they're referring to the Cultural Trust capital grant?
But they're different programs, for one thing. Different requirements. If it is the Cultural Trust that they're referring to, you have to be a qualified organization through the Cultural Trust. They're only they have to be a nonprofit. There's no agencies of government allowed through the Cultural Trust, so it has to be a nonprofit. You actually have to be qualified through the Cultural Trust to be qualified for their program. It's also much more limited. Everything still needs to meet the standards, but in that case, it's a $40,000 maximum amount that's available compared to ours, which is $750,000. But there's no match required for Cultural Trust. But again, it's limited to nonprofits that are qualified through the Cultural Trust. So I'm assuming that's, you know, you're right, that's what they're referring to in the SAGE.
Yes.
And our application is not through SAGE, it's through FormSite. So if you are in SAGE thinking you're doing our application, you're not. It has to be through FormSite, and all the links are through our website.
Okay. And there also still seems to be a little bit more confusion about the multi-phase, multi-year grants and how that process differs.
So basically, with the multi-phase, these are considered for very large projects, you know, typically multi-million-dollar projects. So each phase, we have a maximum of $750,000 that could go towards, for each phase. We can't give more than that. So the multi-phase basically addresses larger projects that might be broken down to, okay, we have a large exterior restoration of 1.5 million. We have a large interior restoration of 1.5 million. So that would be a two-phase project, each for $750,000. But it's a minimum of 500,000 per phase, which would be $1 million project. And it could be three, maybe even 4 phases of work. Before the second phase starts, we want basically substantial completion of the first phase. But what we need to do is basically it's a separate grant agreement, and we'll make sure that those funds are available. We'll know when that next phase is getting ready to start, and those funds will be available. But basically, if you're coming into us for a multi-phase project and you're awarded the grant, we're awarding all the phases right now. You're just being given the initial phase as part of this appropriation, and then we'll appropriate the other phases as you become substantially complete with each previous phase. So again, if it's a multi-phase application, we're basically telling you you're getting grants for all phases, but you're only, the monies are being appropriated just for the first phase at this point in time.
A follow-up on that, is there a limit on a number of phases for a multi-phase project?
We've seen 3 phases. I mean, I don't think we've really imagined, again, because each phase has to be kind of done first. I mean, and again, it's the overall project, and you need to have all your basic cost estimating and project plans kind of somewhat in place to know that for us to have those budget worksheets to look to. So once you start getting beyond 3 or 4, I think it becomes difficult. I don't think we have a cap on it, but we've never seen anything beyond a 3 phase.
Okay, I think that.
And if they have something specific in mind, they could just reach out to me or someone else, trust staff, if they have a specific project in mind and how many phases they think it might be.
Okay.
I think I'm going in the wrong direction as far as questions. I'm getting more and not less.
Yeah, this person, they will reach out for later questions. If an organization submits 2 different applications, one capital and one HSM, for example, are the applications judged independently, or does the award of one diminish the likelihood of receiving the other? I can answer that quickly as well. They are judged independently. Okay, people are asking if we could move on to attachments because this is running quite long. I think that's definitely about the time we're getting to go ahead and jump into the attachment section.
Okay.
So first of all, I want to thank everyone for sticking with us. I know it's been a little bit of a long draw here. I'm just going to work to wrap things up and kind of get things moving for you guys about how you can get all of your attachments together to submit alongside your application, so to make sure you're not missing anything. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So in addition to your online application, we have a list of attachments that are required to be submitted on a USB drive in person to the Historic Trust staff. This drive will have all of your required attachments for each application. And please note that each application does have some slightly different attachments. I'll cover those as we go through here. And each USB must also contain a table of contents that lists all of the included documents following our checklist that we provide you. Please keep these USBs organized with folders labeled, and please keep titles of documents relevant and short and clear. Sometimes our computer systems, or any computer system, can have a hard time opening file names that are too large. And if our evaluators can't open your files, they can't fully give your project the attention that it deserves in the evaluation process. So please keep titles short, please keep them relevant, and please make sure that your file formats are all openable. I'll touch on those as we go a little bit for what documents should be in what kinds of format. The USB with all of these attachments must be received by the 4 p.m. deadline on April 19th, 2023, with no exceptions. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the table of contents must be included on every USB. It should list every document included with the application and should be organized by attachment type. We provide all of our applicants with a supporting documents checklist for each grant type. The format for the table of contents should follow this supporting documents checklist closely. You can go ahead and jump to the next slide. So the first attachment is attachment A. This is your applicant information. So this is where a nonprofit will submit their determination letter. It can also be where you have your applicant assurances, which are required for all applicants, or a governing body resolution as well. These documents should be printed, signed with a physical signature, scanned and uploaded. We cannot accept digital signatures. So please be aware of that. If you have to get a governing body resolution scheduled for a board meeting, please be aware to have that signed in time for the deadline submission. Next, we have attachment B, which is ownership information. So if you are an applicant that owns your resource, attachment B is not required. This is specifically for nonprofits or for municipalities or for people who do not own the resource for which they are applying for the grant. It must be included on these properties. I totally lost my train of thought there. Sorry about that, everyone. Oh, no, you can go back to that slide, Alexis. Sorry. So the owner assurances must be signed again, as with the applicant assurances, with a physical signature scanned and uploaded. And then for capital projects, applicants who do not own the resource must also provide a copy of a long-term lease agreement. And in the absence of a long-term lease, the applicant must submit a signed owner authorization form certifying that the owner of the property will be a joint signatory to the grant. Next slide, please. So attachment C is the historic designation of the resource. If you are listed in the National or State Register, this is where you could provide us with a full copy of the most recent nomination form. If you are listed within a district, you only need to provide us with the relevant pages, as some older district nominations could be rather extensive. You could include the whole thing, but please separate the pages relevant to the project so they don't have to dig through there to find the project information. If you've been certified eligible for listing but aren't listed yet, please provide a copy of your letter of eligibility from the State Historic Preservation Office. In regards to the eligibility, as Glenn had previously noted, all properties must either be listed or certified eligible for listing in the National Register by August 1st, 2023. That is a hard deadline. And then for capital projects, in addition to being certified eligible by that August 1st deadline, the resource must be fully listed in the register before any funds can be dispersed. Next slide, please. So attachment D is related to your project scope and team. So for historic sites management, heritage tourism, and municipal, county, and regional planning grants, it's slightly different than it is for capital. So the scope statement is your scope of work with possibly draft proposals, drafts reports from architects or consultants, identifying exactly the work that is going to be completed. For your project team resume, so this is for any consultants or contractors hired to work on the project to show that they are qualified. If you have received proposals, please include them. And for the resumes, they should demonstrate proficiency in historic preservation and show that they are in compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards for professionals working in historic preservation. Especially, please have them provide relevant examples of past historic preservation work that are on par with the work that is being requested as part of the grant. Applications without named consultants should outline the required experience that they are looking for from the consultant that they plan to hire. This attachment is also where you can put your proposed fees and cost estimates for the work to be completed, as well as any historic sites, resources, and preservation plans that have previously been completed. If they have not been completed and that's what you're coming to us for, you can complete the checklist to outline what exactly you're hoping to complete with that document. And then for capital grants, it's very similar. If you have received proposals or selected a project team, you should include their resumes and credentials. Again, you should show that they are compliant with the Secretary of the Interior standards and have completed relevant historic preservation work that is on par with the work being completed as part of this grant project. Again, it's the proposed fees and cost estimates, particularly for multi-phase applicants. This is very important. You must include cost estimates for all of the phases at the time of the application for the first phase. And lastly, the planning documents that substantiate the proposed work. So if your work that is being completed is based off of an HSR, a preservation plan, conditions assessment, or previously completed construction drawings, please ensure that all of those documents are attached. Evaluators in particular like to see that the work is being supported by previously completed research, and that this isn't just a decision being made as a spur of the moment, but rather is supported by evidence that this is the right project for your resource at this time. Next slide. So attachment E is the documentation of your matching funds. So for HSM, Heritage Tourism, and MCRP grants, nonprofit organizations must provide account statements or letters of funding commitment showing the amount of available funds. Please, and I cannot emphasize this enough, redact any sensitive information such as bank account numbers on these files that you do not want public. The New Jersey Historic Trust can be OPRED, so Open Public Records Act. So any information that you submit to us can at any given time be made public. So please make sure that your information is secure when submitted to us. And then for county and municipal government applicants, please provide a governing body resolution that proves that there is a commitment for specific matching funds. Next slide. For capital grantees, we have the documentation of the match in hand, which is the same as for the previous slides, but we also have the documentation of match expended and work completed. Here you can submit signed contracts, invoices, proof of payment, before and after photos, and SHPO authorization for the work that was completed, as well as the capital budget worksheet, as Glenn had previously mentioned, that shows all project costs broken out by construction division. And as with attachment D, the multi-phase applicants must submit this worksheet for the entire project, as well as for the budget for each proposed phase. Next slide. So attachment F represents your organizational ability. This is where you provide any supplemental information such as cyclical maintenance plans, the resumes and credentials of the project manager and the project team that work for your resource, as well as information showing your organization's current year-to-date balance sheets, showing income and expenses, as well as the past year's summary balance. So not just this current year to date, but also a previous year, so that we can see that your organization can provide the matching funds and has the organizational ability to complete this project. This is required only for nonprofit applicants. And attachment G is probably our most favorite to look over here at the office. Attachment G is letters of community benefit and support. So these letters should demonstrate support for the organization, for the resource, and specifically this project. And they should come from not only your legislators, but also from individuals and groups who support your resource, such as scout troops, local volunteers, maybe there's a bridge group that plays, or maybe you have a children's summer camp, anybody that uses your resource or is part of your community. We really want to see that they're involved in your project and they're involved with the work that you do. We also have documentation of community support in other ways, such as press releases, news articles, or event flyers related to your programming. So if you were featured in a newspaper or on the news for an event that you did, please include that documentation here as well. For municipal, county, and regional planning projects, you should include public meeting agendas, sign-in sheets, and any resolutions that have been passed or adopted that show support for the preservation initiatives that you're looking to complete. And then for heritage tourism, you should provide documentation of visitor readiness and visitor counts and numbers if you have those as well. And lastly, we have attachment H, which is photographs. Please note that photographs are not optional as part of your application. We require that you submit photographs. You should submit a photo identification sheet that is numbered and labeled and is coordinated with file names, just like you would submit the table of contents for the overall attachments USB. Please make sure that you're using proper file formats, such as a JPEG, PNG, or PDF. Please note that the HEIC photo format that iPhones and Apple products use is not an acceptable submission for photographs. We also ask that you limit the amount of photographs, but be sure that the property is well documented. Most of our evaluators are out of state and may not have the chance to see your property or have ever been there. So we want to make sure that they can be familiar with your property without having stepped foot there. But we also don't want to drown them with details of every single doorknob or window frame throughout your entire property. So be thorough to give them a good understanding. For HSM and capital applications, you should include photographs showing each elevation of the resource, as well as photos that show the resource as a whole in the context of its surroundings. You should also include photos that demonstrate detailed shots of areas of proposed work. For heritage tourism and MCRP planning projects, you should include photos of the reference property and photos showing significant resources within the project boundary as a whole, as well as including photos that demonstrate need if applicable. And with that, we just have the last few notes about how to set your application apart. Strong applications have previously had a well-written, concise answers to application prompts that aren't copy and pasted throughout your application. We really want to see that you're taking the time to thoughtfully and carefully answer each individual section. We look for a clear, well-defined scope of work that's based on planning documents, such as previously completed preservation plans and HSRs. We look for strong letters of community support, not only from legislators, but also from people who love, visit, or cherish your resource. And we also look to make sure that these letters may not always be boilerplate, but that they really are thoughtful, handwritten, meaningful letters. We also look for compelling photos that give our evaluators a strong understanding of your resource. We also at this time like to remind you to double and triple check your numbers. Make sure your project budget is accurate in your application responses and that any proposals selected or received are the most up to date in your budget worksheets. We also like to remind you that at the time of your application submission, we cannot increase your grant request. So if your numbers were wrong and you need to accept a request for more money, once your application has been submitted, we cannot change that. So please make sure that your total grant request is 100% accurate at time of your submission. And lastly, we remind you to review the attachments checklist before submitting to ensure that all your required materials have been included with your application to give our evaluators the fullest picture of your project as we possibly can. So for this grant round, as with last year, information submitted after the grant deadline will not be accepted. And with that, if anyone has any questions, our chat is open. Looks like we have one. Are each sections of the grant evaluated differently, or are there points for each section of the grant? I'm not quite sure what this person means. Deborah, if you'd like to go ahead and clarify with a follow-up question there.
Well, I mean, I look at it too, is that all the evaluators are basically weighing each section basically the same. They're very evenly. What they're doing is looking at the overall project and all aspects of the application to whether to recommend a grant or not. So each section is basically looked at evenly by the evaluators.
Okay. While we wait for anyone to type any last minute questions that they might have, our program officer contacts are all listed on the screen, as well as for our fiscal officer and then our general website and email. If any of the questions in the Q&A I responded to you saying, please respond to us with more specifics, please feel free to reach out. Our staff is here to help you through this process as you may need us. And it doesn't look like there's anything coming in right away.
Okay.
So thank you for joining us today.
So I just want to thank everybody for hanging in there. I see we still have a lot of people that have joined us today, so that's always good. We look forward to seeing your applications. And as everybody has said, I just want to reiterate, please feel free to call us if you have questions. We'd be happy to talk with you in more detail about your specific projects. So with that, I think we're good. Okay.
I see a quick question that I can answer. So it's where will the slides be available?
Good question.
This recording, as well as the slide deck from today, will all be available on our website early next week.
Oh, more questions coming in. Okay.
Most of them are just people saying thank you since we did not
Okay.
have a chat function available.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, everybody. And thank you, staff. Thank everybody for hanging in there. And we look forward to seeing these applications and these projects.